Welcome to Vermont Today. I'm Terence Jeroloman, your host, and my guest for this segment of the program is Kurtis Hagen. Kurtis has a PhD from the University of Hawaii, and he teaches at SUNY, the State University of New York in Plattsburgh. Kurtis, can you tell us a little bit about your background? Did you grow up in Vermont originally?
Oh, no. I grew up in California, and I went to school at the University of California at Davis, where I studied engineering, electrical engineering, and then I went to Hawaii, University of Hawaii, where I studied philosophy and eventually got a PhD in philosophy.
We have something in common. I got my degree in electrical engineering from Northeastern University in Boston, and then I later went to law school. So we both chose different areas of work after getting our engineering degrees.
Right.
Now you're teaching at the in Plattsburgh, and you teach a course in truth and conspiracy, I understand.
Well, I taught that course once, yeah, as a topics course. I called it actually originally Applied Epistemology, and then Truth and Conspiracy. And so the emphasis is on like how do you know anything is true? I mean, in philosophy we ask, these questions that push the limits, right? So we get this tradition in philosophy of skepticism, where skepticism is sort of radical skepticism. How can I believe that there's an external world, right? That kind of skepticism. Well, I don't push it quite that far in this class, and so I look at it as epistemology, where epistemology is the study of knowledge. How do we know? But applied epistemology, where I'm applying this to something more practical than, does the external world exist? But at the same time, we do ask questions in there that really push the limits. How do you know that the sources of information that we rely on are actually giving us reliable information? And so those kinds of questions. And in fact, the bulk of the material for that class was drawn from two sources. One is a book called Conspiracy Theories, the Philosophical Debate, and the other was an issue of the journal Episteme, which focused, that particular issue focused on conspiracy theories. One was in 2007, the other was 2006. So it's been some very recent work on this idea of conspiracy theories approached from a philosophical perspective. By philosophical perspective, I sort of mean one which asks a general question of warrant. When can we be warranted in believing this kind of a theory? In other words, is there something about conspiracy theories as a class of ideas which makes them unworthy of belief? And an analogy here would be that David Hume argued that miracles, by their nature, are the kinds of things that we are never warranted in believing. So are conspiracy theories analogous to miracles? So that's a question that philosophers have engaged in the last several years. And my conclusion, and I think the general conclusion, the conclusion that I draw from reading these articles is the answer is no. The analogy does not hold. And one reason we shouldn't be too surprised about that is that all parties agree that there are examples of conspiracy theories that were true. That's different from miracles. There aren't any miracles that everybody agrees that really was a miracle, right? But with conspiracy theories, we got at least Watergate and Iran-Contra that everybody agrees. Yeah, the people who hypothesized a conspiracy there were right.
Well, there are some other conspiracy theories that everyone agrees on, like, for instance, the Holocaust.
Absolutely, yeah.
In Germany, during the the 1930s, no one would have said that, no one would have imagined that the Nazis were doing something like the Holocaust. We found out about it afterwards, though.
It's a great example because in that case, I mean, what was being proposed, it was so monstrous that people would thought, you know, man, that is ridiculous. How could such an atrocity be going on with such a scale and efficiency? Well, and so to assert, you know, like 9/11, for example, a lot of people reject that because of the audacity of what's being proposed. But it pales in comparison to what actually did happen in Germany.
And when Hitler first started, when he was first elected Chancellor back in 1933, I think, the first thing that happened was the Reichstag got burned down. And that was another conspiracy theory. Nobody would have believed that, well, our new Chancellor, he burned down the German Parliament. But now we know he did.
You know, and some of these things people dispute, and my sense is that at least people can agree that it is not absurd to suggest that Hitler's Nazis had a hand in that, and that there certainly is evidence that points in that direction, at the very least.
I had understood that it was a done deal, that everybody agreed.
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Some people will probably take that line, and I'm not a historian, so I'm not as sure on that one. But I mean, so I just take a little more cautious line, which is that, you know, there's evidence of that. It certainly is not something that anybody would reject. And so by the same token, you know, we got to look at the evidence in each particular case and see.
But the most current conspiracy theory is 9/11. We have the official conspiracy theory, which would say that 19 hijackers did it with box cutters. And
Right.
then we have other theories which the government has so far refused to investigate. Mm-hmm. You addressed that in your course, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I should say that the course was divided into 3 parts. The first part was relatively short, and we talked just mostly about somewhat standard epistemology. Then we did the second part, which was what I discussed, all these articles about conspiracy theories from a philosophical perspective. And the third part of the course was presentations, where I mostly turned it over to the students to pick a topic and present, and they could argue either way for their topic, whether it really is a conspiracy or whether it's not. Most of them chose to argue that, you know, whatever they chose to talk about was a conspiracy. The exception was the moon landing. We had a couple of people argue that that was not a conspiracy, and I agree with that. But it was in this third part of the course where I took the liberty to have a presentation of my own, and I did argue that 9/11 was a conspiracy. Now, as you pointed out, on all interpretations, it's a conspiracy, right? But I argued that it was a conspiracy that had to have an inside element, that there was insider complicity.
We spoke about the Reichstag in Germany. After Hitler or the Nazis burned down the Reichstag, that was the excuse to turn Germany into a dictatorship. And after 9/11, we had the Patriot Act and all sorts of infringements on our liberties here in America. There's a lot of similarities there. And now there's been an interesting article on the internet. There's an internet website called the Open Chemical Physics Journal. And some researchers in Denmark have investigated materials collected at the site of the World Trade Center after the 9/11 attack. And they've discovered that explosive materials in the powder. Is that right?
Yeah, and in fact, this is more than just a website. I mean, it's true that you can access this journal from a website, and it's part of a series of technical journals that are called the Open blah-de-blah journal, and this one happens to be Open Chemical Physics Journal. But these are relatively new, but mainstream, peer-reviewed scientific journals. And yes, there was an article very recently entitled Active Thermic Material Discovered in Dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center Catastrophe. And I've got the conclusion. I can read very briefly here. We conclude that the red layer of the red-gray chips we have discovered in the WTC dust is active, unreacted thermetic material incorporating nanotechnology and is a highly energetic pyrotechnic or explosive material, end quote.